Bismillahirrahmanirrahim wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa alihi tahirin. We are going to begin a short series. Well, some of the lessons will not be so short, but a short series as in concerns or in as regard of the content on the history of the prophets, alayhim salam. So, first thing that we have to discuss is what is exactly history? What is this thing, history, that we're going to be studying over here? So, history in the sciences, the Islamic sciences, the Hausa topics is called Tarikh. Tarikh. Tarikh is the study of the reports of human occurrences and events which occur in regards to human life, human society. So if you want to say, what is history? What is Tarikh? Tarikh. Tarikh is the study, the science which studies, Ilm Tarikh, is the science which studies the reports of human occurrences and events. So human occurrences and events. So history is very important because why? It shows us our past, a past which we can take lessons from, which we can learn from. Now, historians have their own set of rules and principles, and as well as resources to which they refer. Just like in our study of Ilm al-Fiqh or our study of um, Ilm al-Rijal, we have different principles and rules and resources to which we refer. Similarly, history has certain resources, principles, and books to which we refer. Historians technically usually are a bit more lenient than our fiqh and our hadith researches. However, we do run into contradictions. We do run into problematic reports in history. So we have to be a bit critical where we are taking our history from and how we handle those reports. So over here, things like Rijal could be used. Things like other authentic resources or the seerah of the Prophet. Different things could be used to solve the problem, the weight of the Quran. But they have their own sciences. So history has its own disciplines, its own principles, its own rules, although some of them we share to an extent with other sciences. Similarly, books. We have new period of historical books and the classical period of historical books. When we look at the historical books in the classical period, those are the ones which are very important for us as resources. And firstly, we have most importantly the Holy Quran. The Holy Quran sheds a lot of light on the historical situation of the context in which the Quran was revealed, as well as some of the past histories of peoples, like Bani Israel. Then we have our narrations. We have a hadith from Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, or the Prophet sallallahu. These narrations serve as a very important resource for history. Now, of course, since they are our narrations, we can be a bit strict with them and very critical. We want to know, are they really from reliable resources or not? Same thing with Quran. We want to really know, is this the right interpretation that we could take or not? So we don't want to be loose with these things. We want to use them as a proper evidence. Now, when we go now to books outside of Hadith from the Imams and the Prophet or the Quranic text, we have historical reports, historical books. And these books were compiled by historians during, as example, the Abbasid period. Now, in these books, there's some true reports and some not true reports. There's some conflict and there's some realities. These books were compiled within the dynastic eye of the oppressive governments of the time and rulers. But yet we find many interesting and important points in it. Like there is a book written during the Abbasid period called Al-Imam wa Siyasa by Ibn Qutayba. This is a very important early book. It mentions in that book the story of Saqifa. It mentions in that book how Imam Ali alayhi salam and Lady Fatima salamu alayha did not give allegiance to Abu Bakr and how that Umar came and threatened to burn the house down and how Imam Ali was taken to swear allegiance. It doesn't mention what happened at the incident of uh, of the actual incident of at the house. I mean, like the incident where how Lady Fatima got injured, and there's different historical discussions over there, but it doesn't mention that. But it mentions that Omar threatened to burn the house down, and it mentions that Imam Ali did not swear allegiance. So in this very early historical book, this is an important resource. Another important historical book is Ibn Ishaq, a book by Ibn Ishaq called Sirah of the Prophet. Now, this book we don't really have no more. We have an edited and filtered version by Ibn Hisham, who took out the pro bait things from it. And that's an early historical resource. Then we have books like Al-Waqidi's book, Maghazi, and then we have Tariq al-Tabari, and we have Masudi's book. We have different books of history that we can refer to and then analyze and look at the reports in those books. Or similarly, we have a book by Abu Miknaf, very early book about the events of Karbala. These are all very important resources for us for our historical analysis. So when we dive into history, we need to analyze the actual proper resources and handle them properly. We can't just randomly take things without analyzing them and having some sort of standards and principles. Now, that is a course on its own. We could call that the principles of historical research. That is not what we're going to be doing over here in these short, brief courses. Rather, what we're going to be doing over here, inshallah, we'll be able to meet once a week. Inshallah, I'll try to keep it till Friday morning as long as I'm available. And we'll just come here for about a half hour and we'll go over briefly some historical points. So history can be divided into various phases or even to various specific peoples. Like we could have history which focuses completely on the history of Bani Israel. Bani Israel means the children of Israel. Israel is Prophet Yaqub, alayhi salam. His children are the children of Israel, and all of his children form the descendants of Bani Israel. So many different people. Now, many of those people are lost. Many of those tribes are lost, and there's some research there and some discussions, some higher level discussions that could go in there. But this whole history of Bani Israel can have many, many lessons, maybe many courses. Maybe you could spend years, maybe even a whole bachelor's degree studying the history of Bani Israel. And of course, in the Holy Quran, we have lots and lots of mentions of Bani Israel. Another section of history that we can study specifically is the history of the Arabs, the history of Arabia, North and South Arabia. So over here, we can have a specific course on the history of Arabia, which has many important points. Or we could have a specific course on the history of the Romans, Arum, as boring as that may be. Uh, there's some important points, like about the spread of Christianity into the Roman Empire. What was the state and the conditions of the Roman Empire before? What kind of oppressions did they commit? So all of these are examples of dividing history into different specific nations, specific people, specific dynasties, and we could study those all individually, which could be quite a bit of research. You could spend your whole life studying the histories of peoples. Why would you do that? Because you want to take lesson from it and you want to learn the context. You want to learn what the context is in which we are hearing revelation, which people are being called towards Allah, and in which we live now. Now, the Holy Quran emphasizes on taking a lesson from past peoples. We can view this by inferring this from the many, many stories that we have mentioned in the Holy Quran about past peoples. Now, of course, the Quran is not a history book, but it does bring history. And history is used to give us warning and glad tidings and to guide us to make the right decisions. It is a lesson for us. So when we read in the Holy Quran that Allah the Exalted is talking to Bani Israel and telling us about their story, that is a lesson for all of us. Are we going to fall into the same mistakes as past peoples? When Allah tells us about the people of Ad, or the people of Thamud, or the people of Lut, are we going to fall into the same mistakes that they have? Will we get the same consequences? These are all important histories for us. Now we can broadly divide history into 4 categories or more, depending on how you want to split it, right? Like I said, there's many different discussions in history, many different themes, many different subjects. We can broadly divide history into first the period of time from Prophet Adam alayhi salam until the flood of Prophet Nuh alayhi salam. So this time period between the creation of the first man and the flood of Noah. You may not have heard this before, but we have a hadith in Tafsir Qummi, which states that there were another creation living on the earth before Adam. They were called Nasnas. And these people, they were what we see today as Neanderthals or something like that. These people, they committed bloodshed and sins, and they did, you could refer to the hadith over there, but they were destroyed because of their crimes. Our history begins with the history of mankind, not the history of other creation. There's many, many, many creation that we don't know their history. Think about it. How much do we know about the malaika, about the angels? How much do we know about these nasnas? How much do we know about the jinn? We know very little. So our history here has to begin with the time of Prophet Adam alayhi salam and some things around that. And maybe we talk about Iblis because he was one of the jinn, but we don't have like a comprehensive history of the jinn. Like just like us, they must have a history with many different topics, many different stories. These Nesnesa, they must have a history with many different stories. But our history begins with the time of Prophet Adam alayhi salam until until our current age, right? Because we're talking about the history of mankind in regards to an occurrence of events that happen to mankind. So that's the first period that we could divide history in, the period of Prophet Adam alayhi salam to Prophet Nuh alayhi salam. The second period of historical analysis that we could have is we could say that the time after that, after Prophet Nuh alayhi salam, yani after Prophet Nuh, after the flood, whether the flood was global or local, you'll have to wait till we get there. But after the flood, until the time of the arrival of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu, this is a vast amount of historical research. I think we just took a shortcut. We just skipped many thousands of years we've compiled into one. So we shortcut. We took a shortcut. We compiled it all into one. Hence, in here we have a vast amount of history spanning over thousands of years of history. Especially, like I brought up before, when we start discussing the history of Bani Israel, which, by the way, is also tied into the history of Islam and the history of the Arabs and the history of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu. Because why? These are interacting societies. These people are living together. These people are mixing together. They say historically that when the last Babylonian ruler, you know, Nebuchadnezzar, he when he invaded Palestine and where Bani Israel was living, he took some of them as slaves, right? Took some of them out. Some people stayed in the land. And he took them to Babylonia from Bani Israel, well, not all of Bani Israel, but what was considered Judea at that time. So mainly the tribe of Judah, and maybe there was some Levites, Lawi, because they didn't really like have a tribal area of land, and maybe there was some like Benjamites or something, or some of Prophet Yusuf's descendants could have been around, and any intermingling, of course, but mostly all the tribes have been gone, like they're missing. So this is a small area at that time, a small area of land that they were living in. And he took them, and it said that the last Babylonian ruler, that there were some among the Bani Israel, some among the Jews, and this is maybe around the time that it started to be called Judaism, by the way. That's what some academics suggest. He took some that couldn't work, they couldn't farm, and he put them in some different places. Some of those places are, according to some historical researches, are Fadak, Yathrib, Khaybar. So these would have been maybe priests, Levites, people like that, who were put into Arabia, right? So there's lots of different history there, and there's some historical research, and it's you could spend a lot of time talking about this, but both the Bani Israel history and Arabs and Ismail history, they are interconnected. They are interconnected. They're very much they're like two neighbors here living next to each other. So it's very important to understand that. It's not like they're absent from each other. And this is happening for a couple thousand years or more before Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So it's very important to understand that kind of historical context. Anyways, so there's so much that could be talked about over here in the history between Prophet Nuh and Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Like Prophet Musa alayhi salam. Prophet Musa is the most mentioned prophet by name in the Holy Quran. Bani Israel, as I said, Prophet Isa alayhi salam, Prophet Jesus, the falling of the first and second temples in Al-Quds, Jerusalem, the period after Prophet Isa alayhi salam, the formation of what somewhat has influenced contemporary Christianity, the different Christian sects and sectarian factions, the history of the distortion of early Christianity, different trends in early Christianity. Like there was this one guy who believed that all that needed to be followed was Luke's gospel and Paul's letters, right? So there's all these different histories that you could go into over here, and this is a vast amount. Maybe PhD, mass bachelor's to PhD, you could spend in this period of history. Even then, we can include talking about the history of Jahiliyyah, the period before Islam in Arabia, Jahiliyyah. So that is the second classification of history. That is too much for us to cover in our course, but we will refer to some parts of these. Third period is the history of the Prophet of Islam. We call this Sirah an-Nabi, the biography of the Prophet. And this can take alone several years to complete. Just the history of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And if we want to be real critical and analyze everything, again, maybe you're going from a bachelor's to a PhD just in the history of the Prophet. That's a lot. Then in this category, we can include the history of the Aima, the Imams alayhum salam, which again is a lot. We're talking about 300 years of history with their individual biographies and the social context and the political situations of that time. And then we could have over here also included in this the history of early Muslim societies. Fourth classification of historical periods is we can have from the time of the major Ghaiba. Imam Mahdi, may Allah hasten his return, had two Ghaiba. Ghaibat al-Sukra and Ghaibat al-Khubra. Ghaibat al-Sukra is from the time Imam Mahdi was born, around that time. He's very young, until the death of his last Na'ib representative. I think this is some maybe 80 years or so. I'd have to go back and check. And Ghaibat al-Khubra is the period from that representative's last death until now and continuing. The minor and major occultation, So this fourth classification of history can continue until our contemporary time. Here we have a lot of important history. And somehow, and in reality, we are living in that history. And maybe we're somewhat ignorant of some of this history. So it becomes very important to know our contemporary history. Now, in the prophetic history as well as the history of the Imams alayhum salam, there are certainly ideas and there are certainly areas of debate. There are certainly room for examination. There are even controversies in our histories. As an example, did the Prophet ﷺ have daughters, or are they the daughters of Lady Khadijah's? Or were they stepdaughters, someone else's daughters? Now we'll get to it later on, but if you don't stick around, we have hadith from Ahlul Bayt saying the Prophet had daughters. Now there may be debate on that hadith, but to someone like me, it seems like a reasonable narration. Second is, how did the Prophet ﷺ die? Did he die naturally or was he poisoned? And if he was poisoned, how did that happen? And there are different opinions amongst Shia scholars. All three of these ways of how the Prophet died are views held by different Shia scholars. Same with the daughters. All different opinions of Shia scholars. So don't be fooled by these people who don't study Hausa and they come and say, no, this is Sunni view and this is Shia view. La, go study Hausa and see that Shia scholars themselves have difference of opinion. Another area of debate is, how did the Imams die? Were they all died, or did some die naturally? Were they all killed, or did some die naturally? Now, there is a narration, attributed hadith, that says that they either died by the sword or by poisoning. Sheikh Saduk accepted this idea. Sheikh Mufid did not accept this idea. Two big scholars close to the same time. They have difference of opinion. This is an area of research and an important one. There are there are some brief points. Some of them are very important because so these are some brief points. Some of them are very important. Why? Because some of these controversies that we find in history that people so easily go out and just narrate become fuel for Islamophobia. And that Islamophobia is used then to twist people's minds away from following Islam. But in reality, with a critical research, we may come to different opinions, or we may understand the problem differently. But those Islamophobic people, they will twist things around and without proper knowledge and with ignorance and mislead from the path of Allah. So those Islamophobic people, they may bring some suspicious historical reports, some suspicious events to try to cast down Islam. However, when we study things at an advanced level, we can view those issues and critically analyze them, and we may understand them differently or better, or we may even come to a different view about them. So we have to be researchers and thinkers, or else we may be easy prey for Islamophobia. Okay, now before I end the lesson, we have some conditions. First, history is one of the most debated topics. Hence, we must enter this course without assuming the history. Okay, you've heard many histories. Have you heard them from a critical historian? That you may not have heard. But you've heard much history. So don't assume you already know. Wait till you see the histories and analyze them, the reports, then think about it. Many times historians have relied on weak grounds. Hence, we must seek the best. We must try to seek out the best view. We must find what is taught to us by Thaqalain, the Quran and Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. So it's very important that we approach any Islamic science, any Islamic study, open to finding the truth, not assuming that we already know something before approaching it. That's good, you know something, it made sense, but now we want to see and put it to the test if we analyze things at a critical level. And you now are researching like a scholar and seeing evidences. Now, this course won't be too critical. Like I said, we're going to try to meet once a week, inshallah, as I'm available on Friday morning, inshallah. And I'll just broadcast it live here, and the videos will go up on the Zakatul Ilm. But it's going to be very brief. These courses will be very brief, because you have to go more depth. You have to, like I said, we could go from bachelor's to PhD, maybe from elementary to PhD in studying history. And even then, there's still probably more to do. So over here, we may refer to books of tafsir, although we're not doing tafsir. We're just referring to some opinions held by mufassirin. We may refer to narrations, hadith collections. I like to see that there's some kind of weighty balance to a view. So I may bring some narrations to prove an opinion. Or we may refer to other historical works. So those kinds of things will happen over here. Now, what are we going to do in this course? Our aim is to have a brief look at Ulul Azm. A brief look at the history of Ulul Azm. But first, we're going to talk about Prophet Adam alayhi salam, because why? The history of mankind begins with Adam. And also the story of Prophet Adam is extremely important for us. It is a practical guidance. It's like a book on its own. It's practical guidance. So it's very important to begin with Prophet Adam. Then we'll talk about, mostly we'll do Ulul Azm, which are Prophet Nuh alayhi salam, Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, Prophet Musa alayhi salam, Prophet Isa alayhi salam, and Prophet Muhammad sallallahu. Now, when we get to Prophet Muhammad, we're going to have a more expansive amount of lessons, and we'll try to look at some of those critical things, but we won't be able to do everything because, like I said, that's too much to cover in short and brief courses. So after that, then we will finish this brief history. So inshallah, if Allah grants us the tawfiq, we'll be able to finish it, inshallah. And after, well, of course, we're going to have a break for Muharram, for the first 10 days of Muharram, inshallah, and then we'll return. So inshallah, tune in around 7:30, 8 a.m. Central Time for this course live, inshallah. Wa akhir dawana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.